Acid production in the body occurs through three phases. The first phase is the colonic phase, the second phase is the gastric phase, and the third phase is the intestinal phase. Now, a mnemonic that I like to use to remember these phases in order is CGI. CGI is used in movies to make special effects, and this is a quick way in which I can remember the order of these phases. Now, the first phase is the colonic phase. And the colonic phase is going to be mediated by the vagus nerve. When we see food, when we taste food, when we smell food, or even when we think of food, the vagus nerve is going to be stimulated and it is going to produce acetylcholine and GRP. Acetylcholine is going to bind to the M3 receptor found on parietal cells, and this ultimately results in production of acid. GRP stimulates the G cells to produce the hormone gastrin, and gastrin can bind to the CCKB receptor found on parietal cells to also produce acid. Another function of gastrin is to stimulate the enterochromaffin-like cells to produce histamine. Histamine can bind to the H2 receptor found on parietal cells to also stimulate the production of acid. Now, as you can see from this picture, when acetylcholine binds to the M3 receptor and when gastrin binds to the CCKB receptor, they're going to be using the intracellular signaling molecule GQ, which is going to increase the levels of IP3 and calcium in the parietal cell. When histamine binds to the H2 receptor, they're going to be using the intracellular signaling molecule GS, which increases the levels of CAMP in the parietal cell. Now, the increasing levels of these molecules are ultimately going to stimulate the activity of the hydrogen potassium ATPase found on parietal cells. And once this ATPase is stimulated, we're going to be dumping hydrogen into the stomach and bringing in potassium into the parietal cell. As you can see here, we're also going to be dumping chloride into the stomach. So the acidic environment of the stomach is going to be made up of hydrogen and chloride, so hydrochloride. Now, what we just discussed is the colonic phase of acid production, and this is going to be the first phase mediated by the vagus nerve. So remember, the vagus nerve can be stimulated by the taste of food, the smell of food, the sight of food, or even when we think of food, the vagus nerve can be stimulated and result in acid production through the pathway that we just discussed. Now let's discuss the gastric phase. The gastric phase, I think, is easy to remember because this is going to be occurring when the food enters the stomach. And it is going to be mediated by the hormone gastrin. So when the food enters the stomach, gastrin is going to be released. And remember, gastrin is going to be responsible for doing two things: for stimulating the enterochromaffin-like cells and also binding to the CCKB receptors. And remember, ultimately, the down effects of these two activities is going to be to increase the activity of the hydrogen potassium ATPase found on the parietal cells to produce acid. So that is the gastric phase. The intestinal phase is also easy to remember because all the activities that occur in this phase is going to occur in the intestinal. So the word intestinal kind of gives it away. So this is going to occur when the food enters the duodenum. And when this happens, we're ultimately going to first produce acid But the main effect of this phase is to actually decrease acid production. When food is entering the intestine, the ileum and the colon is going to release something called peptide YY, and this peptide is going to be responsible for inhibiting the enterochromaffin-like cells. And if we inhibit the enterochromaffin-like cells, then we're not going to be able to produce histamine, and histamine is not going to be binding to the H2 receptor, and we're also not going to have the downstream effects to produce acid. So as a result, the main function of the intestinal phase is actually to decrease acid production, and this is kind of a way for the body to protect itself from a too acidic environment. So hopefully this video helps. Thank you for your time.